Good morning. We are going to listen a presentation by Mar Grau. She's an environmental scientist and also an anthropologist, and she finished her PhD last year on water management and adaptation, from a historical perspective in Terrassa, in a case study in Terrassa. And since 6 months ago, she is working with TURBA Lab in a research on climate change adaptation policy in Barcelona, and she will explain her preliminary results to us today.
Okay, so yeah, thank you very much for coming here. Well, they were giving some signals to us, but hopefully if there is a streaming, they will tell us. So today I'm gonna explain you one of the lines of the research that I'm developing here, which is co-production of climate policy with a focus on urban cities. I've not done this research alone. I've done it in collaboration with Isabel Ruiz, Hug, and Arnau Monterde, which is from another group from here, from INE3. Well, I hope that this works. And today I'm going to present preliminary results on this research, which is focused on the Pla Clima in Barcelona, so focused in a case study. But before, I wanted to start with climate change and with this kind of a little bit freak metaphor. I think that it's important to understand that climate change is a social issue, and maybe through Game of Thrones we can understand that winter is also something which is caused by societies, but is also framed and faced by societies in different ways. So in the case of climate change, we can see that it's not just a natural phenomenon, but is caused, and so we have different responsibles, and is also addressed by different people and different levels of administrations, but also different stakeholders in different ways. So we don't have summaries coming. Climate change is a little bit more complex than winter, but I think that this metaphor can explain us that climate change is this kind of socio-environmental challenge. Okay. Today I'm focusing on the role of cities on addressing this global challenge. Cities are starting to be pointed as a new actor in the international agenda, and for the reason last week we had this kind of IPCC conference focusing on cities because they want to produce a new report on the urban role, on the urban issues and climate change. But we have also policymakers interested on developing solutions of climate change in the urban arena. So there are multiple solutions in framing in different ways, from infrastructural way, but also from a social way. And today I'm going to focus on how these kind of climate solutions are created, and how a novel or promising concept, which is called co-production, is implemented in this kind of climate solutions. Particularly, I'm focusing on the case of Barcelona, which has a short history on on engaging with cities and to produce this kind of climate solutions. This is the Compromís Pla Clima, which it was signed in 2015 for COP21 in Paris. And why co-production? Because co-production is seen as an opportunity, but the notion of co-production is quite ambiguous, as many other novel notions. It has a complex genealogy coming from public services. It was framed by Ostrom on the 70s, but also from STS studies. And nowadays it's also applied for the co-production of public policies. Also, an interesting thing on co-production is who are the co-producing agents. So in the debates on co-production of knowledge, science has a pivotal role, but also in policymakers, citizens, and organizations. So, as I said, co-production can be seen by multiple perspectives, and we need to a little bit to disentangle all the different ways and conceptualizations and operationalizations of this concept in the case of climate change. So this research tries to shed light on the processes of co-production on the case of urban climate policymaking, and specifically it addresses 4 questions. The first one is how co-production is conceptualized, always in this context of co-production of climate policymaking, how these practices, so how this notion is put into practice, so which are the different practices implemented, how digital platforms shape co-production practices, but also the ways to frame this notion, and in what innovative ways co-production can contribute to improve urban climate change governance. So, as you can see, they are very explorative questions. Just as a little bit as a flash to understand what is Pla Clima. So, we don't have a pointer, but Pla Clima, as I said, it was preceded by another agreement with citizens, which is called the Compromís de Barcelona Pla Clima. Pla Clima is designed to be presented in COP23 that was during last November in Bonn. Pla Clima also responds to the international commitments such as the Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, and Pla Clima is the continuation of another climate and energy plan by the local council that was established between 2011 and 2020. So it's not just an isolated plan, but framed within international and local agendas. As I said, Pla Clima was co-produced, and the decision to be co-produced was partially, and we will see it through the results, because the new local government is emphasizing this concept and is defining it in the case of participatory in the Department of Participation. And co-production in this case is just in the design of the policy, but is imbricated with collaboratively establishing agendas and also collaboratively implementing the results. In the first case is through the PAM, with el Programa d'Actuació Municipal, and in the last case is through the Compromís de Barcelona Pla Clima. So, in order to explore the conceptualization and implementation of co-production for this case study, we developed a mixed methods analysis with interviews, participant observation, using also the surveys, the post-workshop surveys that were emailed to participants. We also analyzed the platform, the digital platform, and we also reviewed the secondary documents, policies, plans, newspapers, and also accompanying materials in order to establish the context. So all this information was combined in order to answer the research questions. The main data analysis, it was through ATLAS-T, through a codification. We use multiple codes. We use, and we are using, because I'm presenting preliminary results, we use multiple codes in order to codify the interviews and to relate them. And we also use simple techniques in order to analyze the quantitative data, such as this kind of evaluational scales that we did during the interviews. So let's go to the results. I'm structuring the results in 3 sections. The first one is with whom, so which are the co-producing agents, and who is the public engaged in this kind of in this co-production process. Here, what we can see is the different engagement over time, framed by the number of visitors in the digital platform. So we had over almost 2,000 visits in the digital platform over this period. And as you can see, in the beginning, there were more visitors than in the end, but we can see a constant attention on this process. But visitors are not exactly the people who is participating in this process. So who are the stakeholders involved in this process? Here I'm putting a few examples on the stakeholders that were involved in the workshop, co-production sessions, and also in the digital platform. What we can see is public enterprises from one side, also professional organizations, environmental consultancies, and other environmental enterprises, some private enterprises, then unions, few NGOs, and then also some educational organizations and some institutions that were related to the local government. So they are the involved stakeholders. But importantly, we can also analyze who was giving proposals during this process. So for the deliberative sessions, which are the presential sessions, we had like these numbers of participants. We had this number of participants, and which is not quite a lot, but something, 39 and 8. And then for the decidim, we had also 16 citizens involved and 4 organizations. What we saw is that in the deliberative sessions, few citizens were involved, while in the platform, although this is a short number, 16 citizens were involved. So citizens were more involved in the platform, giving proposals, than in the presential workshops. This graphic is also showing us the number of rejected proposals, which I will explain you later. But you can also have like a little bit the numbers on which kind of session was finally delivering accepted proposals that were finally included in the plan, in the municipal plan. As I said, few organizations were participating in the decidim platform, and they were basically these big unions, big enterprises, and big public, well, not big, but medium public enterprises. In the interviews, we also asked informants to evaluate their perception on the participation, and as you can see, they evaluate very low the participation of citizens and moderately low the participation of organizations. We not only have different degrees of participation and different stakeholders involved in the process, but also different roles and responsibilities. And this is one of the questions that we addressed during the interview. So if we want to co-produce, what different roles we want for the different stakeholders involved in the co-production process. So we want the same roles for citizens and for public officers. We want the same roles for organized and non-organized citizens. So in this case, what we see is that these roles and responsibilities were asymmetric, and therefore their participation. Here, the blue arrows are showing us their role as designers. So the public officers were designing the autonomous sessions that I will explain later what is it, the presential workshops and the process in platform decidim, and also the prioritization process, and also how the Pla Clima was designed, and which were the sections and so on. They were involved as participants in the presential workshops, but they were not giving inputs in the decidim platform and in the autonomous sessions. The second stakeholder here important is SPY3, which is an enterprise that is is facilitating environmental participation projects. And they were in charge of the design of the autonomous sessions, the workshops, and the platform decidim, and also involved partially in the prioritization process, but they were not actors participating in the co-production process. Then we have stakeholders. Stakeholders were members of a network called Barcelona Més Sostenible, and in order to design how this co-production process was framed, they had to participate in a commission called Comissió de Seguiment, and only 9 members, you can see them here, were part of this commission. So in order to be involved in the design of the co-production process, they were somehow filtered. Later we can explain a little bit more how this commission was working, but regarding their participation, they were participating in the autonomous sessions. In fact, they were the only stakeholder capable to participate in these kind of sessions. They were participating in the presential sessions, and they were also involved, as I said before, at least 4 organizations in the decision platform giving inputs. So they were involved in the 3 processes of collecting proposals for Pla Clima. Finally, we have citizens, non-organized citizens, that were not at all participating in the design of the process because, of course, they didn't have the institutions or the facilitation to be part of this process of design of the co-production process. So they were giving their inputs in form of proposals in the presential sessions, and they could give also inputs in the decision platform, but they were not, as I said, involved in the design of the co-production process. So as you can see, we have this kind of asymmetric roles and responsibilities in the co-production process. So we can talk about co-production, but not in egalitarian terms. The second section of results is how co-production was implemented. So which kind of co-producing practices were put into practice in order to operationalize this notion that, as I said, was somehow decided in the political level. So, as I said, first we have this kind of autonomous sessions. They were a tool to better engage with stakeholders, members of the Barcelona Més Sostenible network. So they were a tool to engage with organized citizens. These organizations had a package, we call them a kit of recursos, a kit of resources, in order to develop a session in their own organization to collect proposals and then take these proposals and put them in the platform decidim. So it's not a kind of organized, pre-organized session by the public officers or SPY3, the facilitators, but themselves should create this kind of session, should create and should develop this kind of session. As I said, only one organization carried out this autonomous session, mainly due to limitations for calendar. The second tool to implement co-production were this kind of more traditional or classic participatory sessions in which different deliberative tools were used to collect proposals by different citizens and organizations. So these kind of spaces were facilitated, as I said, by this group, by SPY3, and we have 2 different sessions for collecting proposals. Then after these sessions, all proposals were put in the digital platform. The third step of co-production was directly the platform decidim. So any citizen and any organization could go to this web page, could introduce different ideas, and then people could vote it and could comment it on these ideas. As I said, citizens and stakeholders were the ones that were introducing these proposals in the platform, but not public officials. Finally, the last step was a prioritization process that in the beginning was designed to prioritize, so to put in order the proposals and to throw some of them, but finally was more used as a grouping process. So, for instance, here we have the table of governance and cooperació, which were one of the tables that were used to group different proposals and to elaborate them a little bit more and to categorize and order them. So this process was mainly carried out by Espai 3 and also by the group of public officials that were in charge of Pla Clima, and was also written in the platform decisions so that everybody could see whether their proposal was accepted or rejected and why. This is what has happened the last month. So what we can see is that Barcelona and the digital platform play a central role on all these implementing practices. It's one of the key spaces of co-production. What we can see also is that we have different techniques, more classic and less classic techniques to operationalize co-production. Some of them derive directly from these digital platforms, such as interactive tools, such as voting or commenting others' proposals. Some are more classical, derived from the workshop, so this kind of more deliberative techniques. And also, and this is a recurrent issue in the interviews, another tool was to process complex information in the form of accompanying materials in order to facilitate the dialogue among different stakeholders owing different knowledges. What we saw also in the interviews was that these techniques were highly valued by among informants. Mainly the combining resources, as I said, were very important, very central to facilitate dialogue among different experts and citizens and so on. Then the techniques of deliberation were also highly valued, and then the depth of the debates were moderately valued, mainly due to the calendar and the comprehensiveness of the plan, because a plan about climate change is taking issues about water, about energy, about mitigation, about adaptation, about risk, about many different things that sometimes are difficult to enter into depth. And finally, the last section of results. They are more qualitative. I'm sorry, because I'm presenting preliminary results. This will be probably, and maybe you can give us some ideas on that, probably they will be framed on semantic networks that, for instance, LST has this kind of possibility. But in this case, I leave it them as exemplary quotations. So about what is co-production? Interestingly, because not all informants were knowing, of course, what is co-production. So here we have the first question. Well, co-production is the same as participation. This is a recurrent issue, and I think that it's important to understand which are the differences and whether stakeholders themselves know the differences and they want to know them. Another thing is that co-production is also, as many concepts, a negotiated concept. And for instance, some stakeholders were giving directly a proposal for what should be co-production. So not saying that it's something established, but it's something negotiated. So for instance, here we have an organization that is saying our proposal would be something more permanent and co-production as a tool for not just co-producing policies, but also giving some before diagnosis and follow up these policies. So a kind of more permanent thing about all the policy making process, and which make us, all of us, more co-responsables. Yeah, well, I'm sorry because my English sometimes. Then others were more executive or more practical, so saying that co-production is simply about different people collaborating to implement something. So we need calendars and we need responsibles of this kind of collaborative effort. And then we have also the meanings of the own organizers. So they are talking about this kind of shared leadership, and some of them are thinking about the whole policy making, some others just for products. So it's also important co-production of what. And interestingly, some public officials were saying, well, in fact, we we are now saying co-production of things that we were doing for the last 10 years. So maybe it's just a novel way to a novel term, but we have co-produced many different things. And they are saying this kind of, well, the topical sentence of not just for citizenship, but with citizens. The other question, interesting, was the expectations and the motivations. So why co-production? Why is it important? And here, the answers were more creative. So people was talking about this need of complicity, this need to be listened. So some citizens were saying, well, I'm not listening in the problem I have in my neighborhood. So what I want is to participate because I know that different people have different views on different problems, and I think that institutions should collect all these pluralist views. So this kind of inclusiveness discourse. Some organizations were also in this discourse, and finally, many of the stakeholders, of course, it was there were not many stakeholders involved in this process, so they were just simply there because they are very motivated, and they don't want to resonate a lot on why they are motivated, because we are motivated for this, and we should be here always, no? And finally, the organizers were saying, well, why co-production? Because it was somehow a top-down decision. So somebody told us to implement, to use this term because, and this is interesting, because we had limited resources. So as we had limited resources and we had already an established network of stakeholders, we could do a co-production process instead of a participatory process, broader and needing more effort. So here, of course, as you can see, another interesting topic is the differences about participation and co-production and how they are framed differently, and also how these different ways of framing co-production can generate different expectations on what this process should be and how this process of co-production should be implemented. So finally, as I said, I'm giving preliminary results, so we are still thinking about the discussion of these results. Mainly we are thinking about 4 different topics, and I will leave it just like this, and then maybe in the debate we can expand them. The first one is the barriers and enablers to engage organized and individual citizens in this kind of urban climate policy making. So through the interviews and observations, we are listing this kind of barriers and enablers, but I think that it's important that these kind of limitations and facilitating factors are different depending on the subject, which is part of this co-production, so it's different for citizens than for stakeholders. The second question, and also here in the barriers and enablers, it's important to understand the public unengaged, so the ones that are not part of these processes and way that they are not involved on and knowing them and so on. The second thing, as I was saying in the last section of results, converging and diverging views on co-production by various stakeholders. So this is important because we are negotiating this concept, which can be an opportunity, but it also can be an opportunity to do the same. So if we want to do something else and to better and effectively involve citizens, we need to see which is this kind of dispute and negotiation around this concept. The third question here is the multiple roles of the digital platform. As I said, the digital platform was just not a space where people were giving their proposals, but it wasn't a space that was also shaping the process of saying that we need transparency to put the accompanying materials, that also the facilitators were engaged in this digital platform, putting the proposals of the presential workshop, so it had like a transversal role, and I think that it's interesting to somehow shed more light on which are the roles and maybe the obstacles of using this digital platform, of using digital platforms in general, in fact. And finally, the last thread of discussion could be the novel contributions emerging from co-production, which is quite related to the second one. So which are these different ways and novel ways that co-production is giving to us to better involve citizens, organized and non-organized, with public officials, and how this can improve the governance of climate change in complex arenas such as cities. So, thank you very much.